Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1007th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have a huge pleasure and privilege today of being your MC for a conversation with Debra Bricker Balken, Mark Gibson, Mark Hudson, Steve Locke, Lisa Yuskavage, Chris Martin, and Harry Cooper. We will conclude today with a reading from Fong Bui. And now I'll introduce today's guests and hosts. Debra Bricker Balken is an award-winning independent curator, scholar, and writer who has assembled numerous exhibitions on subjects relating to American modernism and contemporary art for museums internationally. Mark Thomas Gibson is an artist who uses modes of caricature, pop, fantasy, and narrative to reflect on current American history. The work most often takes the form of drawing, painting, and books. Mark Hudson is an author and the art critic of The Independent and a London correspondent for the Brooklyn Rail. Spanning painting, drawing, sculpture, and installation, Steve Locke's practice critically engages with the Western canon to interrogate the connections between desire, identity, and violence. Working from a heterogeneous array of cultural tradition, Chris Martin makes paintings that serve as a living document for the eternal present. For more than 30 years, Lisa Yuskavage's highly original approach to figurative painting has challenged conventional understandings of the genre. And our host today, Harry Cooper, has been senior curator and head of modern art at the National Gallery of Art for 16 years. His latest exhibition, Philip Guston Retrospective, will conclude its run at Tate Modern on February 25th. Thank you all so much. We're so lucky to have this brilliant group here on the NSE today. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Harry, to get us started.
Thank you, Eleanor. And thanks to the Brooklyn Rail and Fong and his whole team for all of the energy and attention they gave this exhibition. And thanks to all of you for being here. So I will be your non-leader, I suppose, for today. And I just wanted to start off. We thought we would start off. And by the way, I'm so looking forward to hearing from these six colleagues whom I haven't really heard from before about Guston. We've reached out to various artists and critics and art historians from various forums, and so this will be a great, God willing, concluding exercise for the Guston exhibition. I do want to thank quickly, since this is maybe the last hurrah, just some of the key people involved in the show. It was curated by myself along with the original team of Kate Neeson in Boston, Mark Godfrey in London, Allison DeLima Green in Houston. They were then joined by others as the show took its course. Mike Wellen and Michael Raymond in London, Megan Bernard, Terrence Washington, Ethan Lasser in Boston. Thanks always to the Guston Foundation, Musa Mayer and Sally Radick there. The directors of all four museums, some of whom changed in mid-course, and enough. So to begin, we have a lightning fill-in-the-blank round, okay? 3 minutes each. We've asked our panelists to select one image or a few related images by Guston that they have something to say about. So Eleanor, that's a view of the entrance to the show at the National Gallery venue. And so starting with Blackboard, this is one of the marks, I believe. You're on.
I thought it was me.
Steve. Is this Steve?
Yeah, it's me. It's Steve.
Steve.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Steve Locke, Blackboard.
I know I seem like I'm from London, but I'm not Mark.
Okay.
I know. I can sort of forget that. So I'm thrilled to be in such excellent company. And I think about this painting a lot. Blackboard from 1969, 12 years after Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education, and how the meaning of this painting has sort of changed for me over time. Because when I first saw it, I thought it's really about teaching and learning, right? It's a blackboard in a school. So what is the lesson that's being taught here? And I think it's such a salient thing, the way art comes back to you over time, because right now we're in this really frightening moment about education and how we talk about the past and how we teach about the violence of the past. And so it's a little prescient to see this painting in 2024 when we're in a moment where teaching about this particular history is such a fraught experience. Harry, you're muted.
Wow. Thank you, Steve. I think you got another 60 seconds if you want.
Oh, do I really? The other thing I would really like to say about this painting as a painter, I love how you can see how he was making choices and canceling them out. So you can really see how this painting turned into this image. The thing I love the most about Guston is that he's not a painter who executes an image. He really seems to me to be a painter who finds the image in the paint. And I've always loved that about him.
Beautiful. Thank you. Let's move on. So this is Deborah's image.
Oh, I thought I was going to have a poem picture, but so I can talk about Guston in relationship to the poem pictures and I guess to the Nixon drawings. But just to back up, I get to my recent intellectual biography or cultural biography of Harold Rosenberg, largely through Philip Guston. Well, I was at work on, first of all, the Guston Poem Pictures exhibition that I assembled in the mid-90s, which ultimately fueled the Nixon project that I did in the early 2000s. I became struck by the writing of Rosenberg on Philip Guston and wondered why nobody was discussing Guston. I mean, Rosenberg at this point in time. You probably all know that when Guston's show opened, at the Marlborough Gallery in 1970, it was greeted by widespread withering criticism. And I was always taken by the review that Harold Rosenberg wrote for The New Yorker in 1970 that had a wonderful title called Liberation from Detachment, which I then could compare or juxtapose with the very withering byline or headline that Hilton Kramer wrote of Guston in the New York Times, a Mandarin artist pretending to be a stumblebum. There are numerous correspondences between the arc of Rosenberg and Guston's career, but I'll just say that in that article, Liberation from Detachment, Rosenberg goes on to predict that perhaps Guston, of all of the artists who will emerge in the 1970s, will have the most impact or the most influence. And I think that that's borne out, particularly at this cultural juncture.
Thank you, Deborah, also for filling in a little bit of the Guston history. And this one of several caricatures that Guston did over the years. And this one I think is the very image of non-detachment. He's on fire. He's bristling.
He's an action writer.
Yes, action caricature.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on. And this is Mark Gibson, I believe.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, I given the opportunity to talk about Guston. I usually like to think about the painting Gladiators, but before that, I have to look back at where this image maybe originated from. And I go back as far as to the Queensbridge Housing Mural Project. And when I was looking into it, and recently I was looking at this one drawing that he did, the color pencil and ink drawing of which he used to propose for the actual mural project. But when I think about like right now in a political moment and how we actually, as an artist who maybe deals and talks and works with inside of politics in their work, where do we draw the line? Like, where do we cut it? there's an image that he draws where he's showing like poverty, he's showing deprivation, he's showing the depression, he's showing war, he's showing like people in labor and this figure, the large lurch-like figure, almost like from the Addams Family, who's standing inside of a coffin-like doorway with a child at its feet. It's like this is what he was proposing possibly for this public mural in a housing project. But the image that we get in the end is like people working, people striving, people trying to make a better life. Work and Play is the name of the piece that he actually ends up making in Queensbridge. It's very long, beautiful work. And one of the only remnants that actually holds on is the kid with the trash can lid and like being kind of knocked over. But what I love is what happens over time is that these faces get removed. And what we end up having are these bodies that are kind of just caught in the mix between fantasy and play. So almost think about this kind of reality and this escapism, where you have in the first image of the drawing, you have this kind of hard depiction of reality. By the time we get to the work and play image, we have the fantasy, But also I have to think about this work being made at a time when the wars are starting and World War II is kind of really kicking off. And then where are we in that? Like how are our bodies kind of placed inside of that? And where are we seeing ourselves going when we start to enact that? So that's why I just love this kind of period of his work. And it's kind of this weird transitional period where he's making work for the country, part of the WPA. And then slowly he's starting to like lose some sense of that. He's starting to really think outside of like back to the easel. Like I think about 1940, 1941, he starts to really kind of, moves to Woodstock and starts kind of getting back into that away from the public. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Mark. And I'm so glad you included that detail of the finished mural. That we don't usually show it because it's unfortunately not in at all original condition, but we can see how, that sketch you're talking about, images of pollution, despair, poverty, and I can't imagine the reaction of the government panel to that. I'm sure it was quite negative, and so that definitely played a part in Guston's doing more positive imagery before he moved on, as you said, to the autonomous work and the faces and masks and hiding and so on. So
yeah, it comes back around, and it finds itself in the mass in a lot of ways. Putting it out there, but yet hiding it at the same time.
Another sort of iteration of violence and distress and play. So okay, next, and I think this is Lisa. I gave you all 4. Lisa, are you there? Are you muted?
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I came to Guston. I studied with one of his students at Tyler School of Art, Stephen Green. And if you don't know Stephen's work, he is an interesting artist, and he kind of always talked about Guston in the it was a very close relationship. So I know there are painters who actually in our midst who actually were at lectures with Guston, who actually studied with him. But for me, it was a kind of more of a grandfather that I never met. And there was always this kind of like, at Tyler, there was a lot of kind of Guston ripoff painting going on. And early on, I did a lot of reading about Guston. And the interesting thing about Guston is that he left so much to read because he said so much. Not a lot of artists said a lot. And that wonderful book of the collected writing and lectures is so important. And what he left behind besides his work, and what's so incredible about what he says is really all about the struggle to paint and the sort of and the ideas of becoming a painter and continuing to paint. The thing that I realized early on was one of the one of the most deadly things you could ever do is to get anywhere near the look of these paintings as an artist. For me, that was sort of like, don't go anywhere near this. But what is it that you could take from Guston that would be so essential? And one of the things that became essential was this idea that was very unpopular at the time, which was going back to Europe. It was kind of a bad idea for an American artist. And he went back to Europe at a time when everyone had rejected Europe. And I decided it was a good idea to go to Europe, not to go back. My family had come from Europe, but I thought, I'm going to go to Europe and I'm going to actually follow in the footsteps and figure this out in that way. And there were a lot of lessons. There were sort of breadcrumbs without wanting to make paintings that looked like this. And Rome is where he went, and Italy, in other parts of Italy, of course, you know, we know his worship of De Chirico, of Mantegna, of Piero del Francesco. And I've gone in all of those places and looked at all of those things. And it's fascinating how he also, looking at all of those artists, also found a way to look backwards without being a backwards artist. He sort of made shockingly new art. Sometimes when I look at this work, I can't even imagine what it must have been like I mean, we know what it was like for the audience, is this idea of like, what the hell is this? But it must have been so shocking for him, like, what have I made? You know, that quote, but Lee is it a painting, you know, is actually more apt here, is like, you know, are these even paintings? And it must have been really exciting. But the idea that he was one of the very few artists that actually kind of like was this American artist, and actually, shall we say, a Ukrainian of Ukrainian descent, and actually kind of decided to go and really immerse himself in the language of European painting, but made something that doesn't look like anything that ever existed before, which I think is extraordinary. And that became something that I decided to sort of try to understand what that is and how do you do that? But at the same time, the lesson is, how do you do it without copying him? I don't know if I have any more time left. I know we're going to be going around and around, but one of the reasons why I picked this group, the other thing I learned later on after reading him a lot, is something that I found, and I was desperately looking for the quote everywhere. And then I finally found it, and it was that one of the things that he did that blew me away was when he was trying to figure out a way to continue with his work, he was quoted as having said he decided to take, he created the images, these the hoods, and he, in order to kind of continue figure out ways to like what to have them do, he's quoted as saying, I decided to be like a filmmaker, because also he was a great film buff, a great reader, a great intellectual. And he just said, I decided to create a mise en scène, to pull back the camera and to just let them run amok. And like the idea of the edge of town, put them in cars and let them kind of move around in these worlds. And it sort of gave me a lot of clues for how to be an artist in my own work, and sort of say, well, what would happen if it's not really, you've created these characters, and what would happen if you pull the camera way back and you just imagine what they might get up to? Anyway, it must be time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. I'm glad you.
I have stuff to say about color, but we can do that on another round.
We'll get back to you.
Yes.
Great that you had these four to give us that cinematic feeling. Two of these were in the exhibition to talk to. Okay, let's move along to Legend with Mark Hudson, I believe.
Mute.
And you might be, yeah.
Muted.
Muted, okay.
I'm not muted. I'm gonna mute.
No, it's me. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I chose this painting because it seemed to address the overall theme of these sessions of the new social environment. I went back to the show in the Tate Modern in London 2 days ago, virtually to the minute. This was the first painting I saw as I walked in, and I just thought, lockdown plus post-lockdown, a kind of alienated mental state we've all been in, and a lot of us never quite got out of. Time's been shot to pieces. This guy's in bed. Is it 4 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon? He's surrounded by inscrutable personal symbolism that he's content to try to express, regardless of anyone's ever going to understand. He's at the most connected position anyone's ever been in history, and also in some ways the most isolated. So that just seemed to speak absolutely to a current kind of condition. And it reminded me when I first saw Guston's late work, which was in 1982 at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, big exhibition, which was the first time London had ever seen any of this work. I mean, he wasn't a massive figure as an abstract expressionist. People just thought, oh, this guy was an abstract expressionist. Where the hell is this coming from? We were right in the middle of an upsurge of neo-expressionism. You know, we just had Schnabel, Kiefer, Baselitz, all these people. It should have fitted in with that. In a way it did, but it just had a kind of total uniqueness. I mean, you saw the color, the mark making, the line. You never ever forget that. But where the hell are you going to go with it? We were also at the tail end of a horrendous upsurge in racist violence and far-right extremist groups, which in a way this kind of connected to, but you just didn't know how the hell to put all these things together. You left the place thinking, I'll never forget that, but where do I go with it? Now it feels like the world has caught up with Guston, or maybe London's caught up with Guston. What struck me about this work, and so much of the work, was, before when I saw it, I thought, this doesn't seem to come from any known tradition I can even think of. It's how much it's got to do with surrealism. In the London show, this was shown right beside 2 very early Guston works in a very hermetic De Chirico mode. You have 2 naked people. I think one's a philosopher, one's a naked woman, beside inscrutable objects that approximate the human figure. I just thought, you jump from 1935 De Chirico internal hermetic landscape to 1977 internal De Chirico-esque Guston landscape. It's like you just jump like that. And so much of this work has this, you're taken into this hermetic interior landscape, which, like De Chirico and so many surrealists, I can't imagine what the hell the landscape around this is. It's just there as it is. What a position from which to address 4 massive psycho-political episodes as he did. That's 3 more than most painters ever do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I can't resist jumping in just to say, I think when you saw this first, you really intuited so much about it. And we know from another painting called Odessa that horse certainly relates to the Cossacks, among other things, the persecutors of the Jews, and part of the impetus for Guston's fleeing Ukraine in the first place. Thank you. Let's move along to whatever is next. Pyramid and Shoe, and this is Chris Martin. Might be muted, Chris.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So just to say thanks to the Brooklyn Rail and everyone, it's really great to be here. I've always loved this painting. One thing that, as a painter, was an important thing that I took away from Guston was this use of the horizon line. And I guess that was in the late 70s. A little later, my daughters also were doing all these drawings, and they would always start their drawings with a line at the bottom. And then you knew where things were. And it was something I was wrestling with in my own paintings. And I always loved these very simple Gustons, where some of them are very black, where there's this simple horizon line. And this painting, it's huge, you know, it's a 10-foot painting. And it's painted like a Monet sunset, you know, the painting is gorgeous. And the image is kind of uncanny. It's this pairing of the pyramid and the shoe, and one is the, I guess, the gigantic human monument of a whole culture, you know, it's one of the wonders of the world. And then next to it is another wonder of the world. It's like an old shoe. So it's got like, either it's a gigantic shoe that's 40 stories tall, or the pyramid looks like it's made out of bricks. It looks like it's something you could make in your backyard, kind of. So he takes like the giant abstract sublime thing and then the lowly human thing, and he jams them together, and it's funny, it's goofy. And you know, there's some quote somewhere about Guston doesn't want to make paintings that vanish into meaning. And so, you know, you can put meaning or ideas, one's own, you know, thoughts about this painting, but ultimately to me, so much of Guston is so great because it's this mystery. I believe these things are real, that it's some kind of truth, but I can't ever know or pin down the meaning. It's kind of like when somebody tells you their dream, and, you know, in the dream, like you were riding on a blue horse, but when you're dreaming it, it all makes perfect sense. It's all real, it's all true. So I think a lot of these great late Gustons have that sense of an imagery which is, you know, a mystery to him as well. And so we're left with these things that are undoubtedly true. They're such beautiful and profound paintings. And at the same time, you know, I'm always unsettled. I never know what it is, which is maybe why I love it so much. I also wanted to say something quickly to Debra. I love that you put that drawing of Rosenberg. I just finished your book, actually, on Rosenberg, which was fascinating. And he has this cartooning ability that he applies to completely mysterious things. And I think on the one hand, when you look at a New Yorker cartoon, the ability of a cartoon, or like a Crazy Cat cartoon, is to be completely succinct. You know, they're trying to, so that you get, in a few lines, you get all of Harold Rosenberg. You know, that's a real kind of talent to have that. But Guston applies that kind of cartooning genius not to giving you the message. He applies a kind of cartooning legibility to something that's very profound and unconscious. So there's that too. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And this painting would have been in the show, but it was too big to extract from the living room in which it resides. So I'm glad.
Someone has this in their living room?
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
They shouldn't say who, but it's a great painting. And I love the shoe sphinx. I always think of it as a shoe sphinx, and you know, because the sphinx would be somewhere in that vicinity in that shape. But as you're saying, Chris, you know, the sphinx is not a bad figure for Guston. You know, when you mentioned that quote about vanishing into legibility, which is not vanishing into legibility, Guston's own quote. I guess that's what the Sphinx is all about too. So I've had a chance to jump in on everybody. Maybe before we go on, and we have a whole, scrolling of images and open-ended conversation. But first, would anyone like to respond or have a shot at any of the 6 or so images we've seen so far? Chris, you already went back to Debra. Anybody else want to do some cross play?
I would like to talk a little bit about what Chris has put forward about meaning.
Yeah.
Because for me, when I was in school, and I went to school in Boston, and so Guston's shadow was very, very large. He taught at BU for such a long time. And one of my first painting teachers, John Ember, was one of Guston's students. And so we were sort of fed Guston a lot, and particularly this period, because we had just lost him when I was starting my sort of formal art education. And for me, I was very interested in making images that had meaning, right? And to have like all this sort of painting that was supposed to be like hard edge abstraction, where you were just supposed to get it by looking at it. If you didn't have the eye, you wouldn't understand it. Guston was like a breath of fresh air, because you could make an image of something, and just because it was an image in and of itself, form carries meaning with it. And one of the things I think that Guston learned from George Harriman, who did Crazy Cat, was the economy of shape, and how the shapes are immediately recognizable in his work. But like Chris was saying, the way he deploys them, it really does feel like a David Lynch movie or something. Like you don't understand why these two things are together, but they have to be together. And it forces us to re-examine these paintings again and again and again, because the meaning of a blackboard in 1969 is very different than the meaning of a blackboard in 2024, where classrooms don't even have blackboards. So these kinds of things, the symbols he uses, they border on being eternal, but they also sort of collapse into nothingness. And every time I see this painting, I think about the images from the Holocaust of the piles of shoes from murdered Jews, and how that figured so prominently in Guston's oeuvre. And so I think about these two things in 1977, this sort of container for the dead and the symbol of the murdered together in the same painting, right? And I think that that's one of the things that Guston gives us. It's the painting that Mark Hudson talked about, where there's all these symbols that start to cohere and then decohere. Like he's sleeping, his head is right next to a horse's ass, right? So like, what does that mean about him? Like, what's Guston trying to say about the dreamer? Like, there's all this violence, all this sort of stuff that's coming towards you, and you're dreaming. Like, we don't have time for that. So there's something about that work, and I feel like, to agree with my other colleague, Mark, I do think that Guston is a deeply political artist. I really do. And I think that he's filtering what's happening in the world through the material in his studio. I really think the things that appear in his paintings are things that appear that he, like Lisa was saying, that he struggles with.
And Steve, I think the best political artists actually always point to themselves first, and,
Absolutely.
and not out to the world. They know they are the beginning is them. That just like Solzhenitsyn said, like if you could cut evil out of your own heart, that would be the beginning.
Right.
So can you go back to the slides that I chose, because I actually was going to it's because what you're saying, Steve, actually kind of picks up on something I was going to say. So the painting Caught 1970, the use of the finger pointing, there's a lot of finger pointing in Guston, but the finger is never pointed outward, it's always pointed inward. And I remember when I was doing a lot of my reading, usually during a period of being extremely lost and not knowing where to go and what to do, and also self-flagellation, as in bad habits. when, you know, this is a known thing about Guston, and, you know, you talked about the, you know, the Holocaust, and Guston's name was Philip Goldstein, and he, I'm never 100% certain why he changed his name, other than, I mean, Muse is here, maybe she can pop in at some point and explain it, you know, with certainty why, other than, you know, flying under the radar a little bit. I don't want to say that's why. I guess that was my misinterpretation. But when I see these paintings and I see a Jew who's now going by the name Guston, and paint where you are painting, eating, smoking, and self-flagellating, but the finger is always pointing at yourself,
Right.
at himself, the painter, and it's not at the it's like to say that you are the painter, that you are the worst enemy, and that, you know, he was an extreme fan of Isaac Babel, who rode with the enemy. And, you know, because you know, he was sort of such a I mean, I actually think Guston is, I will actually say that Guston is, I think, the greatest artist of the 20th century. And I want, you know, I could say, like, for me, I actually think it will come down to that.
Wow,
Because
I think you just dropped the mic, Lisa.
I dropped the mic? Oh, I thought maybe you said you didn't hear me.
No, drop the mic with that statement.
I think he has, no, I actually have thought it for a long time, and it's just like, I've been thinking about this for such a long time, and I just think he has everything. It's a form, you know, when I was a kid, we used to go to these things called smorgasbords, and it's just like, it has it all. It's not like, it's not this kind of skimpy thing where it's just like one or the other. It's everything. You know that expression, it's everything. It is, but it's done in this, it's this most extraordinary, I mean, I find it the most extraordinary thing. And all I do is think about how to, you know, understand and unpack this work more and more and more. And I think it just, you know, I'm not surprised that it was difficult in America at the time when it was difficult for this work. I just find, you know, it's the work that we need.
Well, it's thick and
yeah, Mark.
I think a big part of it is because it is thick and it's dense with history and political history. It's dense with the political histories that he's dealing with when he's down in Mexico. I think about Rufino Tamayo work, where that hand does appear often in his work, where a light bulb also appears often in his work. And you do see that idea of like where these ideas inside of the comics world and a lot of the world that he's also looking at, that he's a part of, and reason why I even think of Lurch, because in 1938 you do have Charles Addams who drops like the Addams Family. So that some of that drawing line, some of that thing that you see that's very popular, is also kind of being presented in the work that he's making at that time when he's making those murals. But I think there's this like thing, what we talk about is swiping, like, or used to be considered in comics world is swiping. It's very different than, let's say, like copying, or the way that we think of copying maybe in like the fine art world. It's where information has like a language that's kind of attached to it, and then you're able to use it and readdress it somewhere else and inside the images. And so over time, he's doing this to himself. He's doing it with a little bit of history, and he's looking back at Cello, when he's looking at like Della Francesca, like he's taking the little bits of these things, but he sees how, because it's like, it's of a war scene, it's of a battle scene, it's of an argument, it's over a conflict. It is looking back at, you know, the Spanish Inquisition. He's like pulling all these things, and he's talking about history and time and these things that keep happening, these things that keep occurring, these things that are always a part of who we are as a society. I think that the reason why I brought up the WPA thing is that he's highly already aware of that. You know, he's already done all this work. And so he wants to kind of present this type of realism to the American people in a works project, but knows the kind of culture that he's actually sitting in, which is in the American culture, which is like when they want to say, let's do something that's about, you know, cheeriness. You know, let's not look and document in our public works what is actually happening on our streets and what's happening in our lives. So these bits kind of fall in and they kind of come into the work, and then he kind of has to keep readdressing it and keep readdressing it and keep scratching back at it and it's there. And so when we get to the 70s and we do get to these other elements, there's so much history behind them. And that's also where the meaning and also what comics can kind of do, or what that kind of wobbly line offers you, is that there's this kind of space where it can bend and it twists, and it can be that and more. It can be that and not that. You know?
And he's not, and I'm going to mute myself and not say one more word after this. I've just been dying to say. He always says it's all about drawing, and he may be one of the greatest draftsmen. And it's all of his work starts with drawing, and there may be more drawings than anything. But oh my God, the color! Like, where in the world does this color come from? I mean, I know it comes from frescoes, staring at frescoes, but like, I cannot believe this color. It just is like nothing else. It's just. And I'd read somewhere in one of Rob Storr's earlier books on Guston, he talks about the personal primaries of Guston.
Right.
Not every color is on a Guston palette. It's like, I think he named them, and I was struggling. I was looking through the book to see if Rob's book to see if I could find it, but I had the wrong book where Rob names the colors. It's like cadmium red, medium, cadmium red, light, cadmium orange, and white, of course, black, and permanent green. It's just like very particular color, but certain, like you almost never see certain colors on a Guston palette, cross mixtures of those other colors. It's fascinating.
Jump in. Dawn here has sort of all the classic Guston colors at once, and they go back to a palette he came upon in the 50s when he was an abstract expressionist, and you can find the exact same group of colors there. As you say, some colors are almost always missing. Purple, yellow, not a lot of blue as in a major role. I just wanted to add, I'm so glad that Mark Gibson mentioned, through the Mexican muralists, the Italians, and I think one thing you maybe were getting to is just the way Guston, among many other things, breaks down the line between cartooning and painting. And we can think about the simplicity of Frangelico or Giotto, certainly in the black lines around Giotto's, and this.
But that is such a critical thing, Harry, because when you look at some of the alphabet paintings, that depend so much on drawing. Like there's one that's like a shelf of books, and like all the books are outlined, and then suddenly there's one that's just a strip of paint, and it holds itself as a form, and it's kind of uncanny the way that he's able to do that. And Caught, like we're looking at now, the way that the edge of the Klansman on the right is just paint. And so and then, I'm sorry, when you look at some of those alphabet paintings, you can feel the light around them. So even though they have this sort of quote cartoon language to them, which is a word that I always struggle with, because I because of this work, I don't see the difference between graphic novels and cartoons and stuff like that. I often think of them as all the same thing. But he really is a master of using the paint to create a sense of light and space. And going back to what Lisa was saying about going to Europe and looking at all those painters whose paintings have to register to the eye from 50 feet away and create like a sort of majestic space, he is really, really tapped into that. And so the bigger the paintings get, the more they feel like you're participating in them, like you're implicated in them. And it's got to be like one of the most bodily experiences I've ever had looking at art, where I really do feel like I could step right into the picture, not in a ridiculous sort of way, but like, what the hell am I looking at, and why am I invited into it?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, if anyone knows the answer to this? So I went to Rome, and like kind of, coming off what Lisa said, and like I was walking and thinking all about Guston, and I was thinking about the Academy in Rome, and there's this thing where those like pink walls, right? You have like that color, and then you have those like pieces of stone that are embedded inside of that. And they're almost like hanging in space, and they're out of their time. They're out of, something could have been 50 years here, 100 years there, whatever, between, and they're all there. And when I saw that, and also looking at the fields of like, the Colosseum and how things were laid out and things that he had drawn when he went over there, I kept thinking about like, we think about that space, but there's something that's happening inside of that wall. And he's confronting that space that, often when he talks about drawing, and I think it's like 48, 49, or that year that he's there, when he's in Europe, and he's like drawing, and you see his drawing starting to break down and starting to like disassemble. It's like drawing cities, and then it starts to like kind of lose that. It's like sometimes he said something in the drawing about like he's actually like looking, like a lot of times it is a still life, or it is observational on some level. And I always felt like there was some kind of jump that happens in that moment when he sees that kind of space. And I don't know what that's called. I've always wondered, like, what is that even called? Like putting that on a wall, like dealing with flatness like that, like taking three-dimensional objects and like embedding them that way. And that, not edge to edge, but like just in space.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that happens in the work, and that's what allows for what we see right here to even kind of exist.
Guston actually represents those patches where the plastering stops and reveals an older, part of a wall in some of the prints and Gemini prints, a couple of paintings too. I think that's a matter of wanting to the architect designer wanting to leave visible some ancient fragment, but I'm not sure. I'm wondering if we should, thinking about politics and cartooning, we should maybe scroll ahead to the Nixon drawings, and maybe the cartoon, I'm sorry, the poem pictures that Debra wanted to talk about as well, pretty far down in the scroll towards the end, I think. Does that sound okay to everybody? Little farther down, yeah.
I love these drawings. I really do.
Yeah, we could stop anywhere. These are the so-called pure drawings.
These drawings.
Let's hear someone on those drawings. Yeah, sorry. Let's
Go ahead, Chris.
one.
Yeah. So the really simple line drawings, I guess he made a lot of these down in Florida. It's a real moment of crisis where he's moving from one world of abstract expressionism to something new. But it reminds me of this really funny story. Guston obviously has had a huge influence on so many of us, but a friend of mine, Stanley Whitney, was a student of Guston's, and he remembers walking around downtown New York with Guston right around this time, 67, 68. And Stanley was moving from figurative art to abstraction. And he knew that Guston was doing these drawings. But the funny thing is they'd be walking around downtown, and Guston, they would walk by some big red Cadillac on the street of the East Village. And Guston would say, Stanley, you should be painting this. You should be painting this Cadillac. Or they'd walk by some brick wall and he'd say, look at that, Stanley, you could be painting that. And of course, Guston was talking about what he was hoping to paint. And at the same time, Stanley was going in the opposite direction. But it was this lovely friendship at that moment when they were both crossing. And I think about these drawings a lot because, they're incredible, but it's important to remember that for Guston at this time, this was a terrible thing to be down to one line. I mean, it's tough. He didn't know where he was going, and he knew he was changing. And I think for many of us painters, his ability to go through these various crises and really change are very, very inspiring. The fact that he could reinvent himself several times, always gathering more and more of who he really is into his new thing. So I look at these drawings, they're kind of scary to me to be down to a line like that, but also it's like the new world. He's wiped away. I can't do any of that anymore. And so I love these drawings.
I do too, Chris. I feel like the struggle in them, the sort of, you can go to the next slide. That's fine. That's actually better. Like the idea that what happens if I make this shape? What happens if I make this shape over and over again? And what happens if this shape actually loses its meaning? Like when you start to say the word foot over and over again, it just becomes a sound. It doesn't become a thing.
Right.
And the same thing happens with form. When you keep reproducing forms over and over again, they start to empty out. And I really see him emptying himself out in these drawings. And some of them that are just lines, and then you see he puts a little hook at the bottom, and suddenly it becomes like a paw or a leg or something. It's this really beautiful refinement of him trying to get to the new logic that becomes the new work. And I know people harsh on the early work too, because it's abstract and all that sort of stuff. Those paintings are lovely. I really do love all of those paintings. But when he gets to this point, I feel like it's what Lisa was saying, that it was no longer an outward expression. It became this inward investigation. And
Yes, there's
yeah.
the third drawing on the bottom from the left is a book, and to the right of the book, they're just these marks.
Right.
I was just obsessed with this drawing. I was in London a few weeks ago, and this drawing really caught my eye because he's making just marks. And then when he puts them in this thing, it becomes like words in the book, or it becomes windows. And it's a wonderful drawing because on the right-hand side, they're just marks. And then, but then it becomes a book. And it's like you see him sort of at the ground zero of how do you make an image, or how will he find an image?
Right.
And yeah, it'd be nice to own one of these, wouldn't it? Yeah.
So
Oh,
just to-
come on. Come on, I'm gonna take one of the big paintings. Hey,
Okay,
Musa, be generous. Give me one of those big
enough
paintings.
of that. I'm going to put a stop to
I
that.
just said he was the greatest painter of the 20th century, Musa.
Moving on. I want to segue because we're talking about drawings, and just to fill in the blanks for those who don't know, probably everybody does. These are the drawings that came before the Marlborough show, and as well as the small paintings we haven't looked at, but that Lisa was showing. And then after that, we get to the Nixon drawings, the poem pictures, and maybe we'll take a quick look at those. There we go. And this is his proposed cover for the book that did not get published during his life. Deborah, you're certainly an expert on this.
Well, one thing I'd like to introduce into this discussion is the importance that Guston placed on his relationships with poets and writers. They were the primary relationships that he sustained during the last decade of his life after he moves to Woodstock. And there are two bodies of work that grow out of these relationships. And they are the Poor Richard drawings that grew out of conversations that he sustained with Philip Roth over a period of more than a year or so, while Roth was writing his deeply mocking satire of the Nixon regime, that being Our Gang. And Guston decided that he wanted to chime in and produce his own book, which focuses on his childhood and ascent to the White House, and one key episode that is Kissinger's trip to China. So, but it's interesting that the Poor Richard project was also produced at the same time that he was developing his poem picture project. And these were a series of drawings that...
Let's move on to those. Before we do, though, I just jump in. I've never noticed that television at the bottom right here, which in television was so important, of course, at this time, and for Guston as a conduit for all the images of the Democratic National Convention and everything. And a lot of visitors to the show, when they saw the painting Blackboard, before they saw the title, they thought that's a television. So again, we have always multiple references.
Also, the dog Checkers. That's
Checkers.
Right.
There's so much here. Checkers is wonderful, and yeah. And that stream, the streamer, Poor Richard, being dragged across it. Never occurred to me that at the beach you see the airplanes pulling the advertisement. So okay, So then we've got just a sampling of what Deborah was mentioning, focusing on the trip to China, and don't know. It's always kind of struck me that, you know, he could have really dug into Nixon, to some of the atrocities Nixon was committing. You know, he does reference a little bit here and there, bombing of Cambodia and so on, but he really goes for Nixon, the bumbler and the buffoon, not unlike the way he treats the Klansmen. You know, not maybe not wanting to have a direct confrontation with the awfulness of some of what was going on. And anyway.
I would say probably because he doesn't forget that he's an artist.
Well, but some artists do decide to deal with the worst of humanity directly, but I know there are risks to that. Deborah, I interrupted you.
Well, there was also the risk, though, of exhibiting these drawings. You know, he had initially intended to publish them during his lifetime. Philip Roth sought out publishers, and every time there was an overture, he withdrew, in part because he didn't want to subject himself to, again, the deeply, deeply caustic critical reception to his work from the Marlborough Show in 1970. And it's why they were not published until much later on, when I brought out the book in 2001 on these pieces.
Yeah, and he's running other risks here, obviously, and these drawings required some warnings in the exhibition because of their deployment of racist images and references, whether it's fake Chinese talk or you know, the one in the center is difficult to look at, but of course, this is Nixon's way of conveying, I mean, Guston's, he did identify with Nixon in a strange way. Guston's way of conveying Nixon's racism, which can quickly flip in disturbing ways. So, yeah. Should we look at the poem pictures? I think there are a couple more. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So these, as Deborah was saying, he really hung out more with writers than artists in the 70s when he's up in Woodstock. And one of them is his wife, who was a wonderful poet, Musa McKim. And we have another one from Clark Coolidge. And Deborah's written about these two, but I'd like to hear what do the rest of you think about these? Did these figure in your attraction, your being so taken with Guston, or are they peripheral?
I mean, I've always been fascinated by his relationships with writers, but you know, that, I mean, the drawing, I mean, I just like everything that all of his output, but I think
of course they're not as well known, and
right.
You know, except for a couple of exhibitions, one of which Deborah did. Steve?
No, I just wonder, you know, the sort of, you know, Dominic Dunn, the writer, he said that the stench of failure, when it's on you, drives other people away, right? And so I feel like the Marlborough Show, when he got dragged so horribly, I think that must have really hurt. And I think that I would have retreated from painters and artists as well. And I would have taken solace in people who understood language, people who could read, you know. And I think that I hated Nixon. Like, I was a child when I hated him. Everyone in my family hated him. He was a monster, right? And understanding that someone actually would take him on in that way. When I saw the Poor Richard drawings, I thought, why didn't I know about these earlier? Like, thank God, in that San Clemente picture, with his swollen phlebitic sweat and all that sort of stuff, thank God somebody did that to Nixon. Right. Instead of that Norman Rockwell portrait of him that's in the National Portrait Gallery. Yeah. Like, thank goodness someone drew Nixon as he really was.
But it was interesting. I mean, this was a less interesting point. But I was saying that I always thought it was interesting that Roth was hiding out because of too much attention maybe the wrong kind of attention, and he was actually not a failure, it was more of a success, but it was like the wrong kind of success, maybe.
Right.
Or Portnoy's complaint, and he was hiding out. And as you said, Steve, that it was, you know, the stink of failure, but you know, for Guston, but I think in a way, you know, I think Guston must have known he didn't fail. Because he kept
yeah,
going.
of course.
Yeah, he's
You
also
know.
just extremely literate and self-taught. I mean, with a high school diploma, probably the best read of all the abstract expressionists in the New York school.
Well, with the exception of Motherwell, I mean, we can't forget that. I mean,
Yeah, point taken. Mark Hudson, I want to bring you in here for any thoughts. You're muted.
I'm not so familiar with these drawings. They are absolutely extraordinary, aren't they?
yes.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that there's something about like the conversation going back to struggle, but also then looking at these, is that he kind of does this thing where he reboots, where like he finds a way to kind of like, I never thought, I'm a little bit younger, right? So when I got to Guston, he was usually taught as an example of like how you struggle through something, how you work through something, and that there's a way through, and that you can answer yourself, or you can find ways to answer yourself. And sometimes it's not, the answer is not within inside of you. Maybe it's outside of your community. Maybe it's in other artists. Maybe it's in other writers. Maybe it's in your friends. But I see that in this work, or when I would look at these pieces or post the Poor Richard work, it's that I always thought about like, he's like language and imagery. Like when I think about where he was with just that simple line, where he was with just depicting that book, and to now he's like using that, and now he's actually able to marriage it back into language. You know, when you think about like subtext in comics or that kind of relationship, like he's actually dancing inside of something, trying to still figure out where else can he go, how much further can he go. And it's like there's something I love about that, and what poetry can kind of do, and kind of can open up, and to put imagery to poetry is not easy.
Right.
And the
Yes,
care,
well, you know, what Guston was really drawn to these poets in part because of what he referred to as the freewheeling associations that they brought to his work, that their descriptions and interpretations of his work were not based on theory, that there was a complete absence of cant and jargon, and especially in the poem pictures of Clark Coolidge. You know, he was drawn to his broken sentences, broken narratives, which he thought were a match for the kind of rupture and discontinuity that he was trying to effect in his painting.
And we also have to remember how doctrinaire the abstract painting world was. Like, and I think that like to willingly step out of that conversation took a lot of courage on his part. And I think that courage is understood now. And I think it was understood by someone like de Kooning in the moment, but I don't think it was understood by a lot of his peers. And I think that, you know, what Debra was saying about the importance of poets and literacy to the work as he sort of went on in time is super clear to me. Like I don't think you can make, I think that what Mark is saying about how hard it is to make an image from a poem, or make an image that is a poem, but that's what it starts to become. We start to think about Guston's paintings as these sort of visual poems of elements that come together. And like Mark was saying, for him to actually go back to language and incorporate it is
another that's another third rail he hits, you know, like so that's like, wait, you've already, now you're going to figure, wait, now you're putting language into it,
right?
Like you're done.
I mean, he's sharing
like,
I mean, he's sharing the white space of his paper with another voice, which is also extremely radical, I think, for this period. Unlike other collaborations where, you know, a poem is juxtaposed with an image, he actually incorporates or embeds these words into his imagery.
Right.
There's very few examples of him writing on a painting, though, right? There's a few, but not
There's a
that many.
few in which the title is inscribed. The Odessa painting I mentioned, I think.
And also like painters forums where he writes the name of painters on the paintings, where he writes
Yeah.
PRO and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's Pantheon actually, where he
Right.
does his list of the great Italians. Should we move along? We do want to take questions, and I think we still have some time, going a little long, but maybe look at the end of the exhibition. We've skipped the abstract work, which is hard to talk about, but certainly open to talking about that too. Here we have the painting we saw again on the right in the show, and yeah, let's just and yeah.
George.
Okay, anybody can just jump in. Also, for my concluding exercise, I'll just warn you now. We started with a lightning fill in the blank. I want to have a word association, one word, Guston, one word, one adjective, noun, whatever. So you all can think about that.
Say that again?
I'm going to ask you for one word that you associate with Guston. The latter. So these are massive paintings, and yeah, it's interesting seeing them on the small screen.
I think one thing I wanted to say is that when I saw the show in London the first time, I ran into Stanley Whitney and Marina Adams, and then we ran into several other painters. Just we were all in the show. So somebody said we're going to have a group photograph. So there was the guard took a photograph of all these painters in front of one of these Gustons. And I realized looking at the photograph when it was posted, how big the paintings are. The paintings are really big. And one forgets sometimes when you see an image in a book, some of the images are like one iron or one kettle, but when you're in front of the paintings, they're the most beautiful, gigantic, sort of abstract, real paintings.
Yeah.
And the size of them and the pleasure in looking at these paintings is, I'm a painting nerd, so we're all always going to be drawn to these initially just because they're such wonderful paintings. Like this kettle on the left here. And a funny, not apropos of anything, but I had the opportunity to see Guston's studio in Woodstock recently, and that kettle is in the studio. And so when we walked into the studio, we went, oh, I know that kettle. I've seen that kettle in all these paintings. And then when we first went to see the show in London, I had the reverse thing where I went, oh, there's the kettle.
Yep, the kettle shows up in some paintings from the 30s, very similar.
But these are big. They're big paintings.
Yes, yeah.
The painting I was actually going to initially talk about was Wharf, which has such incredible incandescent glowing interactions of paint, as you say,
that might be a little bit ahead in the scrolling.
And I was absolutely knocked out when I saw that, but I felt, to cut to what I wanted to say, I'd go for the other one, but I still regret not hitting that incredible glowing, shimmering color in that painting.
There's some green highlights in the sea, I think, that
exactly, blue, red, and green. Yeah, absolutely.
It's near the end of the scroll in an installation shot, maybe that one. Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, that's it.
On the left. Sorry, it's not.
Yes.
Terribly
Incredible
visible.
green. This viridian green.
Yeah. Which
I love the spider in that.
I think it's permanent green, according to Rob.
Yeah.
I think it's for we're gonna have to arm wrestle about this, Lisa. It's viridian.
Well, also there's the photo.
About
It could
what
be
color
on.
is what? Oh, that's rich. That's good. That's good. Yeah.
I love it when a photo isn't right with Guston, where you actually get like light on it, so you can actually see the texture, or you could actually see like the way it's built a bit more than just something that just becomes a flattened kind of image of a Guston.
Agreed. Yeah.
Raking light, nothing like raking light. Show that texture. 2:15, shall we go to some
Yeah,
questions?
One last thing I'm just going to say is this painting on the left here, I don't remember the title, the one that's on the left of the
It's from the
room here.
Metropolitan Museum, and
What I love is this, the totality of his career and the way that first body of work that he did as a younger painter, where I think Mark Gibson showed those early paintings where the gladiators, and how that kind of imagery never really kind of left him, and the way he kind of moves. It's just such an extraordinary career, where sort of those phases where he sort of like was always working through stuff, and the way it comes back in, because there were these kids battling things out with the trash cans, and then it comes back, and he brings images. He never really left anything behind, and the way the paint, the things he discovered all along. I mean, he really is an example of how to be an artist, and and also how to focus and to the most and as an extraordinary focus through line to the right. Anyway, obviously, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of
it
this.
makes the curator's job wonderfully easy when images come back and you get to wrap it and tie it in a bow the way Guston did. And
I mean, you have the history of art, and also, when you think about the time this was being made, it's like, and also, and who he was, it's like he doesn't, it's like these mutilated bodies. He's like the history of the studio, the history of the 20th century, the brutality of that. He's talking about like everything.
Right.
And that's what gets me, is that he doesn't give up anything. He's even talking about God, in some ways.
You wanted to jump in there, Steve, and maybe a last word before questions?
No, I'm just nodding in agreement, like I'm at church or something.
Okay. Okay. Well, Lisa, wonderful wrapping up there.
Let's go and have dinner again, okay, Steve?
Oh, I would love to.
So,
Yes.
okay.
I saw Matvey in here somewhere.
He is. He's hiding his hair.
So hush up, everybody. We want to hear.
I'm sorry,
questions from Eleanor. Are you going to recognize some folks?
Yeah, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. We do have a few audience questions here. Our first question is from Richard Jacobs. And Richard, I will give you the opportunity to unmute if you'd like.
Thank you, and what a great discussion. I think, Lisa's point, which she made in a bunch of different ways, that Guston really continuously teaches. I think that's the amazing thing about his paintings, is that he doesn't teach us how to be him, and that would be the wrong lesson. He teaches us what painting can do and really how to paint, or what to think about. And the thing that I get most from him is the process, the concept that he seems to create so much of the narratives in the late works, as if the figures and the objects, which we see as loaded with meaning, are just like part of his palette. And he's kind of shocking himself, maybe, and all of us, by using them sometimes as like formal language, where Chris had that great slide over the pyramid and the shoe. I mean, I just imagine him at that moment, and that, I feel like he's pushing himself past the brink of what's real and past what's surreal, and to this sort of ultimate land of pure imagination. And that made me think, what I don't know about Guston, that maybe some of you guys do, to ask the question, did he ever work from drawings as like a mechanical blueprint, where he painted a painting from a drawing and that was the painting? Or is every work, including the drawings and the prints, is it always just created through the process? Is the imagery and the narrative just come through the process?
Well, I can do a quick answer. I mean, it changes. In the early work, he's very much working out of a Renaissance model of careful preparatory drawings. But even later in the Marlborough show, we know some of the Marlborough paintings, 1970, he just dashed off, and others there are drawings. Not many still exist. that show careful preparation. But I don't think it's at that point it's a guide. It's never you know, ironclad. So should we have one more comment question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard, for that question. We have a question here from Andrew, and Andrew, I'll see if you want to unmute and can ask it on your behalf. If not, well, I will read Andrew's question on his behalf. Andrew asked, what was his studio setup like? His palettes, brushes, brands of paint?
That's maybe more than we have time to answer now. But in the catalog, there are some wonderful close-up photographs that we took of the studio. You see brushes, paints, palette in the later years is a really big just flat piece of glass, I believe, and a single wall for the big paintings, which could accommodate just about the biggest of them. Yeah, but take a look at the catalog if you can, and I think you'll love the illustrations. Any
Amazing.
more?
I think that we have one final question from Fong today. So Fong, if you want to unmute.
Who's that?
It was terrific. Thank you so much, you all. Terrific. I was thinking what Lisa was saying earlier about his love for cinema and to allow those happenings occurring on the stage, almost like a proscenium filmic stage, and catching a little bit of what Chris had said earlier about the horizon. And the two put together, it makes it so curious. And I wonder whether film at one hand, the stage, the proscenium of the stage, and then the whole idea also, still life. He put everything contain, almost everything in the middle. Very few things go up the edges. So that's still life we talked about earlier of Morandi, you know, when Lisa was going further back to Europe again. So it's very curious. I wonder if you thought about, one hand, it's monumental, the storytelling in the filmic sense, in the cinematic sense, but then on the other hand, it's intimacy. If you were to construct images as a still life, things that, you know, so it's a very curious, have monumentally intimate or intimately monumental. It's a both kind of sense that somehow mediate together, whether it's painting small or big. So I wonder if you can comment on that, any of you guys. Thank you.
Battles. I would think of Ocello, Battle of San Marino, or San Romano. Yeah, like supposedly that was like a painting that he was really steeped in and really interested in. And I think about like this kind of what you're saying, this kind of blend between the portrait, still life, and the landscape. Like the moments that you can kind of take in and you can look at that are actually like individual moments of conflict where two eyes are almost meeting, and then the grander scale of the environment and all the things that can be happening that are also playing their part inside of it. And yeah, and I think that some of the mural stuff, I think, especially in the case of the Queensbridge piece, that was one of those things where I think that kind of comes into play, and then you see it in other ways, and maybe negative space in the work and color, definitely color, going back to what Lisa was saying, is a major like binder of that, what makes that all kind of work and come together.
I also think it's a reaction to this sort of idea of the all over painting, you know, the sort of abstract expressionist way of like painting the whole painting at the same time, right? And to say like, all right, I'm going to put the most important thing in the middle of the picture. Like that's what you see in some of those early gray paintings, the sort of transitional paintings, where he's sort of painting these heads and he's starting in the middle, right? And working his way out instead of doing this whole all over like sort of abex expulsion. He's sort of going back to being like Mark was saying, he's going back to being a muralist. He's going back to being someone who's organizing objects in space instead of just like trying to do, you know, like Paul McCarthy in the video Painter, where he's like, feel the painting and all that sort of stuff. He's rejecting all that stuff because he can't believe in it anymore, right? And so if you leave that out, what do you have? You have to go back to beginning. You have to go back to Grisaille. You have to go back to observation. You have to go back to the still life. And then you have to go back to like what first turned you on about being an artist, comic books, like all that sort of stuff. And it's not a retrenchment. It's really, really not. It's really like saying like this thing that I believed for a long time, it's just not true. It's not true. So if I have to abandon that, where am I going to go? And then in some ways, like Mark has been saying for this whole call, he just went back home. He just went back home. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we should probably move on to our poem or statement, and I will abandon my last exercise. We'll do that another time. So you're off the hook there. But I'll just personally thank my 6 colleagues. This is such a great discussion. Really wonderful way for me to round out my Guston experience. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Harry. And thanks so much to everyone who contributed to this wonderful dialogue and for the questions from the audience. To conclude today, I'm so thrilled to pass the mic over to Fong to give us a reading.
Thank you. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Harry. Steve, you know, Debra, of course, Mark, 2 Marks. And then there's also Chris.
And Lisa.
And Lisa, of course. I was thinking what Lisa mentioned earlier, the whole quote is beautiful of Solzhenitsyn. It goes, if only it were so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart. And I think that something that we remember in the panel discussion where I moderated when Musa did that beautiful show, essential, important show, Laughter in the Dark at Hauser & Wirth in January 2017. It was with the late poet, critic William Corbett, who knew and collaborated with Guston. There was Robert Mankoff, cartoon editor, New Yorker, the late Irving Sandler, Katie Siegel, and Lisa was in it. So since it concluded with a poem that I love, and I know Guston loved also, Rilke, it's called The Man Watching. So I'm going to read that poem for you all. It's called The Man Watching. It's in the book. I can tell by the way the trees beat after so many dull days on my worry window panes that the storm is coming. And I hear the far-off fields say things. I can't bear without a friend. I can't love without a sister. The storm, the shifter of shapes, drives on across the woods and across time. And the world looks as if it had no age. The landscape, like a line in the psalm book, is seriousness and weight and eternity. What we choose to fight is so tiny. What fights with us is so great. If only we would let ourselves be dominated as things do by some immense storm, we would become strong too and not need names. When we win, it's with small things, and the triumph itself make us small. What is extraordinary and internal does not want to be met by us. I mean the angel who appeared to the wrestler of the Old Testament when the wrestler's sinews grew long like meadow strings. He felt them under his fingers like chords of deep music. Whoever was bitten by this angel, who often simply declined to fight, went away proud and strengthened, and great from that harsh hand that needed him as if to change his shape. Winning does not tempt that man. This is how he grows, by being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. Thank you.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Fong. That was a really
Beautiful.
conclusion to the discussion today. It's been such an honor and a joy to have you all here on the NSE. So thanks for being here, and thanks to everyone in the audience for tuning in today. And thanks also to the team at the Rail, and thank you to the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSC program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our archive, which you can explore on our YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation will support our writers, production staff, and operations. So please consider supporting our work through a link in the chat. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern for Revisiting Studies into Darkness, a conversation with Amar Kanwar featuring Kanwar and Ratanamal Johal. Thanks so much again, Debra, Mark, Steve, Lisa, Chris, and Harry. Thanks, Harry, so much also for the slideshow and for the amazing images today. Now we'll, in Rail tradition, mute the microphones, and I'll say hello and goodbye as we leave. Thank you all so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Debra. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Debra.
Thank you so much.
Terrific work,
Long
Debra.
live Guston! Long live Guston! Long live Guston for forever!
Yes. I'm Yusa.
Hey, Cal.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks,
Sorry
Hi,
I missed
Musa.
you.
Conversation.
Hey,
Hi,
Musa, thanks
Musa.
for
Thank
coming.
you all so
much.
Sorry I
Thank you,
missed you
Musa.
last couple of weeks ago.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Have a
Musa.
great
Honored to be
afternoon,
here.
you guys.